The night was quiet in Callaway County, Montana. Sheriff Maria Reyes was 3 miles from town when the sky tore open, not all of it, just a strip, just enough to make the ground shake under her cruiser and send the coffee in her cup sloshing over onto her sleeve. She pulled off the dirt road and stepped out. The air was cold and smelled like pine and coming snow. It was October and the dark out here was the real kind. No orange glow on any horizon, no streetlights, just a ceiling of stars so thick it looked painted. Then one of those stars moved wrong. It dropped fast, then slowed, then dropped again like something fighting gravity and losing. It was big. She could tell that even from a distance. It left a line of orange fire across the sky, the way a match leaves a line across a dark room. Then it hit something. She heard the impact 2 seconds after she saw the flash, a deep, grinding boom that rolled across the valley floor and bounced off the mountains. Maria was already back in the cruiser. She called it in. Dispatch said they already had calls. Meteorite. Probably someone from the county office would drive out in the morning. She said she was going now. Dispatch said it could wait. She was already driving. Crash site was in the north pasture of an old cattle ranch that hadn't run cattle in 4 years. The owner, Ben Hartley, had moved to Billings after his wife passed. The land just sat there. Empty grass, a dry creek bed, 3 dead fence lines, the ship. And Maria knew the second she saw it that it was a ship, not a rock, not a plane, not anything. With a simple explanation, had come down at an angle and plowed a trench through the pasture about 120 yards long. It had stopped against a low ridge. Steam or smoke was rising off it. In 3 places, it was roughly oval, dark gray, and about the size of a large house. The hull had deep scoring on one side, the kind of damage that looked like it had been made by something deliberate, not impact damage from entry. Something had been shooting at it. She sat in the cruiser for a full minute. She was not a woman who scared easily. 18 years in law enforcement, 2 tour in the Army before that, a childhood in a house where scared got you nowhere. But she sat in that cruiser for a full minute, engine running, hand on the radio. Then she got out. Smell was strange, not bad, just foreign, like metal and something faintly sweet, the way certain flowers smell when they start to die. She walked toward the ship with her flashlight in one hand and her other hand resting near her sidearm, not on it, near it. The trench the ship had dug was soft earth and torn grass. She walked alongside it. Up close, the hole was covered in markings she couldn't read. They looked etched, not painted, deep lines and patterns that her brain kept trying to make into letters and kept failing. She heard a sound from the far side of the ship. She went still. It was a high, thin sound, like a child crying, but not quite like the idea of crying translated into a slightly different frequency. She went around the hull slowly. Her flashlight cut through the steam. There was an opening in the side of the ship, not a door, more like a section of hull that had been forced or broken outward, and on the ground in front of it there were shapes. She stopped. They were not human. The first thing she noticed was how many of them there were. She counted 7 near the opening, then saw more further back in the darkness. Some were lying flat, some were sitting up against the hull, some were moving, most were not. They were roughly the size of adult humans, but the similarities ended there. They were slender. Their limbs were long and slightly wrong in their proportions, like something that had evolved under different gravity, their skin or what she could see of it was a pale gray-blue, and it had a very faint texture to it, almost like the surface of a moth's wing. Their heads were large, oval-shaped, with two large dark eyes that caught her flashlight and reflected it back like a cat's. They had 4 fingers on each hand. Their mouths were small and set below the nose, which was 2 slits rather than a bridge and tip. They were staring at her. She was staring at them. One of them made a sound. It was not aggressive, it was terrified. It scrambled backward against the hull, and the movement set off several others, and suddenly there was a chaos of thin, high sounds and scrambling limbs. And 3 of the ones that could stand put themselves in front of the ones that couldn't. They were protecting their wounded. Maria kept her flashlight low. She raised her free hand, palm out, fingers spread. She had no idea if that meant anything to them. She kept it up. Anyway, she did not go closer. She stepped back 2 paces and sat down in the torn grass, cross-legged, flashlight pointed at the ground between them, not at them, at the ground. She put the radio on her knee and looked at them. And they looked at her, one of them the tallest, with a pale scar running along the side of its jaw, did not move. It watched her with those large dark eyes for a long time. Then it made a quiet sound to the others. They did not follow. Calm, but they stilled. The scrambling stopped. Maria spoke. She did not expect them to understand her. She spoke anyway, because silence felt worse. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said. "I'm Sheriff Maria Reyes. This is my county. You've come down in the north pasture of a ranch that nobody's using right now, which is probably the best luck you've had tonight. Nothing. You've got wounded," she said. "I can see that. I've got a first aid kit in the cruiser. I don't know if it'll do anything useful for you, but I've got one. I also have a radio, and I can get a doctor here in about 40 minutes if I call him now. His name is James. He's good. He'll help." Still nothing. She didn't know what she was expecting. A response she couldn't have. She sat and waited. The tall one with the scar looked at the others, then it looked back at her. Then very slowly it took 3 steps forward and stopped. It looked at her flashlight, then it looked at her hand, then it raised its own hand, 4 fingers spread, palm out. Maria let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Okay," she said. "Okay, that works." She called James. "Okay, for at 10 past midnight." He picked up on the second ring, because James always picked up on the second ring, had done it for 30 years, and showed no signs of stopping. "James," she said, "I need you to get in your truck. Bring your full bag and as much spare medical supply as you can fit in the cab, and drive to the old Hartley Ranch North pasture." A pause. "Maria, it's midnight. I know. Is someone hurt?" Several summoned James. She paused. "I need you to stay calm when you get here." Another pause. Longer. "How calm do I need to be?" "Pretty calm." On a scale. James, just come. He came. In the 40 minutes it took James to arrive, Maria learned a few things. She learned there were not 7 of them. There were 47. Most were inside the ship. Some could not move. She could hear them through the broken hull. Those same high, thin sounds, some of them lower now, more labored, which she had started to read as pain. She learned that the tall one with the scar was some kind of leader, or at least the one they others looked to. When it moved, others watched it. When it made sounds, others quieted or responded. she started thinking of it as the commander because she needed to call it something, and that seemed to fit. She learned that the ship had not simply crashed by accident of engine failure. The scoring on the hull was weapons damage. Someone had been shooting at them before they hit Earth's atmosphere, and the shooting had done enough damage that they couldn't steer. They had not chosen to come here, they had fallen here. She learned this not through language they had none in common, but through the commander's gestures. It pointed at the damage on the hull. It pointed at the sky. It made a motion with its hand that she read somehow as pursued. Something chasing something. She nodded. It watched her nod. It made the sound she had started to think was confirmation. A short soft click at the back of the throat. They were running from something. Whatever had shot them was still out there. She thought about that while she waited for James. James Ackeffer was 58 years old and had practiced medicine in Callaway County. For 22 of those years, he had delivered babies in trucks, set broken bones, kitchens, once removed a fish hook from a man's eyebrow using tools he'd borrowed from the man's wife's sewing kit. He had seen things. He pulled up next to Maria's cruiser, got out with his bag and walked toward her. She watched his face when his flashlight found the commander and the others near the hull. He stopped. He stood still for 10 seconds. Then he said, "Maria, I know. Those are not James." He looked at her. She looked at him. "Several of them are hurt," she said. "I don't know how bad. I don't know what their biology is, but some of them are making sounds that I think mean pain. And they haven't moved in a while, and I'd rather have you here than not." James looked back at the ship, at the commander, at the ones lying near the hull who were not moving. He breathed out. "Right," he said. He walked forward. James approached the commander slowly, with his hands visible and his bag low. He stopped at the same distance Maria had stopped at. He crouched down so he was not standing over any of them, and he opened his bag on the ground, turned it toward them so they could see inside, not reaching in, just showing. The commander watched. James picked up a bandage roll, showed it, put it down, picked up a small flashlight, medical, the kind used to check eyes and throats, showed it, put it down. Then he waited. The commander turned and spoke to the others. 2 of them came forward, carefully supporting a third between them. The third was smaller, clearly younger, and there was a dark stain on its side that Maria did not need medical training to recognize. James worked for the next 3 hours. He could not know if anything he was doing was right. Their biology was alien. Their blood was dark and thin. Their skin under his hands was dry and very slightly warm, like paper left near a lamp. He cleaned the wounds he could clean. He applied pressure where pressure made sense. He wrapped what he could wrap. He could not know if they were allergic to anything he carried, so he used nothing chemical. No antiseptic, no painkiller, just physical intervention, bandages, splints made from tent poles he found in the back of his truck, pressure, warmth from the spare blankets Maria got from her cruiser. The injured ones were frightened of his hands, but they let him work. That was what stayed with Maria as she watched. They were terrified, and they let him work anyway, because they understood what he was trying to do. She got back on the radio. By 3:00 in the morning she had woken up Derek Morrison, who was ex-Army and currently ran the hardware store and was also the most competent person she knew In a crisis, she had woken up Father Amos at the Catholic Church on 5th Street, not because she needed religion, but because he had a large hall, a generator, and enough common sense to be trusted with what she was about to tell him. She had woken up Carol Briggs at the feed store, who had a flatbed truck and a tendency to remain very calm in situations that made other people fall apart. She had not called the state police. She had not called the federal government. She had not called anyone with the power to take the situation away from her before she understood what it was. She was a sheriff. This was her county, these people, and she had already started thinking of them as people because James had spent 3 hours working on their wounded with the same hands he used on human children, and they had let him, and that meant something. These people had come down in her county, in her pasture, on her watch. She would figure out what they needed. She would figure out what was coming for them, and then she would figure out what to do about it. The commander watched her make calls. It could not understand her words, but it watched her face and her hands and the way she moved, and after a while, it made that soft clicking sound, the one she had come to read as confirmation, as yes, as I think I understand what you are doing, as I think I believe you. Maria nodded. The night was still cold. The stars were still thick above the valley. Somewhere up there, past the atmosphere, past the silent, something was looking for these 47 frightened people who had fallen out of the sky into her county. She looked up at the stars for a long moment, then she went back to work. Dawn came gray and cold over the Hartley pasture. By the time the sun cleared the mountains to the east, there were 11 humans at the crash site and 47 aliens, and the situation had moved well past the point where Maria could pretend it was manageable. Derek Morrison had arrived at 4:00 in the morning with his truck, 3 hunting rifles he kept in the cab, and a thermos of black coffee. He had taken one long look at the ship, at the commander standing near the hull, at James wrapping something that passed for a splint around the lower limb of a small Vulcan who had not taken its eyes off him the entire time, and then Derek had poured himself a cup of coffee and said, "Okay, what do you need?" That was Derek. 22 years of army had turned him into a man who processed shock quickly and moved straight to function. Maria had always appreciated that about him. Father Amos had come with blankets and 2 large kettles of hot water, which turned out to be more useful than anything else because the night had been cold and several of the Vulcan who were not injured were shivering. He had distributed the blankets without being asked, moving slowly, holding each one out by the corners so the gesture was clear. The Vulcan who took them held them for a long moment before pulling them close, like they were not sure the offer was real. Carol Briggs had brought her flatbed and a portable generator, and for reasons she had not explained, 4 dozen cans of peaches and a bag of rice. "I didn't know what they ate," she said, which was practical thinking. Maria had told her to hold off on offering the food until they knew more. By 7:00 in the morning, the commander of the Vulcan, the tall one with the scar that Maria still thought of simply as the commander, had found what they needed to start talking. It came from the ship, one of the younger Vulcan, moving carefully around the others with a limp that spoke of something cracked or broken in the lower leg, had gone back inside and returned carrying a flat panel about the size of a laptop screen. It was dark when he brought it out. He handed it to the commander. The commander looked at it for a moment, touched something on its edge, and the panel lit up. Then the commander walked toward Maria. She held her ground. Derek, behind her, shifted his weight but did not reach for anything. She trusted him to read the situation the way she was reading it, which was, this is not a threat, this is a tool, this is an offer. The commander stopped 3FT from her and held the panel between them. On its surface there were shapes, not letters, something else. Then the shapes shifted, rearranging, and she realized the panel was processing something, scanning her maybe, or analyzing the sound she and the others had made. Through the night, it cycled through configurations fast, and then it slowed. And then it stopped. On the panel, in letters she could read, were 2 words. Safe, please. Maria stared at those 2 words for a long moment. Then she looked up at the commander. Yes, she said. Safe, I promise. The panel did something with the sound of her voice, processed it, added it to whatever store of language it was building over the next 2 hours in broken patches and with long pauses and a great deal of pointing and demonstrating. They began to talk. The commander's name was Veth. That was not the full name. The full name was a string of sounds the panel could not yet translate, but Veth was the part of it that the panel said could carry across. Veth accepted this translation with a small motion of its head that had begun to read like a nod. The Velkin, that was what they called themselves, and they panel gave that word clearly. We're not soldiers, they were not spies. They were families, Veth said through the slow and halting language the panel was building between them. Farmers, teachers, people who had fixed machines and grown food and taught children in a system of 3 planets that had been their home for longer than their history could record. The Dominion had arrived 8 years ago. The panel did not have a word for the Dominion yet. Veth used a gesture, a fist closing around nothing, and the panel showed an image, a series of angular ships in formation, dark, against a star field, moving towards something that could not run fast enough. 8 years of occupation, 8 years of what the panel called struggling for the word reduction. Their cities made smaller, their choices made fewer, their young taken for Dominion labor programs and not returned. The 47 on this ship were the last of a group of 300 who had tried to run. 2 other ships had made it to the navigation point. This one had not. A Dominion hunter ship had caught them at the edge of the system and opened fire. Their navigator had been killed. The ship's steering had been damaged. They had fallen into this solar system by accident, pulled by the gravity of the large gas planet that the humans called Jupiter, and then further pulled by the gravity of Earth, and they had come down here in this cold and dark field, having no idea of what they would find. Veth paused after this, then it said through the panel, what are Terrans? Maria looked at James. James looked at Derek. That's us, Maria said. Humans, we call ourselves humans. We call this planet Earth. Veth processed this. You are Terrans, it said again, as if confirming something. Your world is called Terra in Dominion records. What do the Dominion records say about us? Maria paused. The panel worked. Veth's large dark eyes moved across her face in a way she was starting to read. As careful thought, primitive, Veth said. Pre-contact, not relevant. Maria nodded slowly. And how long do we have? before the Dominion hunter ship gets here. Veth looked at the sky, then at her. Perhaps 2 of your days, perhaps less. By noon the federal government had arrived, not the full weight of it. Not yet, but enough. A black SUV and 2 sedans, 4 men in suits and 2 in Air Force uniforms coming up the dirt road from the highway with dust behind them. Maria had known this was coming. She had kept the sight quiet for as long as she could, but nothing that big falls out of the sky in the continental United States without someone with satellites noticing. The man in charge of the suits was named Hargrove. He was polite in the way that people are polite when they are deciding how much of a problem you are going to be. He looked at the ship. He looked at Veth and the Velkin gathered near the hull. He looked at James' makeshift medical setup and Derek leaning against his truck with his arms crossed, and Carol handing a blanket to one of the smaller Velkin who had come closer during the morning. Then he looked at Maria. Sheriff Reyes, he said, we're going to need to take over the management of this situation. No. Maria said, a pause. He had not expected that. Sheriff, they came down in my county, she said. They are my responsibility until I have a reason to believe otherwise. You can stay, you can observe, you can report back to whoever sent you, but you don't touch them and you don't move them and you don't make any decisions about what happens to them without going through me first. Hargrove looked at the Air Force officers. One of them had his hand near his radio. The other was watching the Velkin with an expression that was more curiosity than anything else, which Maria took as a good sign. Sheriff Reyes, Hargrove said carefully, you understand what this is? I understand exactly what this is, she said. 14-7 refugees who crash-landed in my county with wounded people in a ship that's been shot up. And they have about 48 hours before whoever shot them up gets here. So what I need from you is not a management takeover. What I need from you is a phone that reaches whoever in this government can make a military decision. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. They're being pursued, he said. Yes, by what? By something that is significantly better armed than anything we currently have in orbit, she said. So I suggest we stop talking about who's in charge and start talking about what we're going to do. By mid-afternoon, the panel had enough of their language to carry a real conversation. Veth sat across from Maria and Hargrove and the Air Force colonel, whose name was Bradley. In the shadow of the ship's hull, James sat to Maria's left. Derek stood behind them with his arms crossed, not officially part of the meeting but not leaving either. Veth explained the Dominion in detail. It was large. It spanned 43 systems. It had been expanding for 300 years, absorbing worlds that could not resist and dismantling the cultures of the ones it absorbed. It was not interested in destruction for its own sake. It was interested in control and labor resources. The worlds it took still existed. The people on them still lived. They simply lived under Dominion terms. The hunter ship that had damaged Veth's vessel was a standard pursuit class, armed with weapons that outranged anything the panel's description suggested Earth currently had. If it entered Earth's orbit and found its target, it would demand the return of the Velcon's refugees. If the demand was refused, the panel was honest about what would follow. Bradley listened to all of this without expression. Then he said, what do they know about Earth? About Us, per contact, Veth said, no space. Capacity, no military relevance. As. Pause, they will not expect. Resistance, Bradley looked at Maria. Maria looked at Bradley. Good, Bradley said. Hargrove shifted in his seat. Colonel, we cannot make military commitments against an alien civilization based on. They shot up a ship full of civilians, Bradley said. Not loudly, teachers and farmers. Shot up their ship and killed their navigator and chased them into a gravity. Well, he looked at Veth. How many of your people are on the other two ships? The ones that made it. Veth's expression, and they were beginning to read expression slowly, was one that Maria thought meant grief. Many, many. Hundreds, so this isn't the only group running. No, Bradley nodded. Then this is the first time they Dominion has run into us. He looked at Maria. Sheriff, I'd like to use your county for a few days. Be guest, she said. Veth found Maria at dusk. She was sitting on the running board of Derek's truck eating a sandwich that Carol had brought out from town. The sky to the west was orange and purple, the mountains black against it. The Velcorn had moved more of their wounded outside into the air, which seemed to help them. The shivering had mostly stopped. 3 of the smaller ones, children Maria had decided, though she was not certain, were sitting near the generator's warmth, with blankets pulled tight watching. Carol arranged cans of food with expressions of intense focus. Veth sat beside her. It was the first time it had simply sat near her without the panel between them. It set the panel on its knee but did not activate it for a long moment. Then it did. I do not understand, Veth said. What part? You. A pause. The panel worked. You did not know us. We fell from your sky, and you did not know us, and we were frightening to you. I saw it. I saw that we were frightening. You were, Maria agreed, and still you sat down. She took a bite of her sandwich. Thought about it. You had wounded people. What was I supposed to do? Veth was quiet for a moment. Other civilization, when Dominion ships first come, they close their doors. They send the strangers away. They do not want the trouble of someone else's war. Some humans would do that too, Maria said. Honestly, but not you, not today. She looked at the orange sky. Where I come from, we have a thing we say, something about how you treat strangers, how you treat people who have nothing to offer you. We say it tells you who you are. Veth considered this. The panel translated processed was quiet. The Dominion does not say this, Veth said. No, Maria said. I didn't think they did. The sky darkened. The stars came out one by one, the same stars they always were, looking exactly the same as they had last night before any of this. Somewhere beyond them, something was moving toward this valley. Veth looked up. They will come, it said, even if we are not here. Now that they know a pre-contact world sheltered us, they will come. It will make an example. Let them come, Maria said. Veth turned its head. Those large dark eyes caught the last of the light. You understand the size of what is coming. Maria finished her sandwich, crumpled the wrapper, put it in her jacket pocket. Veth, she said, we've been at war with each other on this planet for about 10,000 years. We are very, very good at it. She stood. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. She walked back toward the lights of the camp. Veth sat alone for a moment in the dark, looking at the stars. Then it made the soft clicking sound, the one that meant yes, the one that meant I believe you. It pulled the blanket tighter and Watch the humans work, the signal came. At 3:47 in the morning, 31 hours after the crash, it came in on every radio frequency simultaneously. Every satellite dish on the planet picked it up. Every telescope array pointed at the outer solar system saw the source at the same moment. A ship that had dropped out of faster than light travel somewhere beyond the orbit of Saturn, dark gray against the black, angular, the way that things built for violence tend to be. Angular, with no wasted curves and no unnecessary beauty. It was broadcasting on all frequencies because it did not know which ones Earth used. It was not being considerate, it was being thorough. The signal was a language none of them knew, but the Vulcan knew it. Veth was awake when the panel began to vibrate with incoming data, and it woke the others, and the camp on the Hartley pasture went from sleeping to standing in under 2 minutes. Maria got the call from Bradley at 4:00 in the morning. She was already walking toward the ship when her phone rang. "It's here," Bradley said. "I know," she said. "Give me 5 minutes with Veth, face in." Maria could read it now, better than she could have imagined 48 hours ago. Was not afraid, it was something else. Something she might have called resigned, except that resigned suggested giving up, and Veth's jaw was set in a way that looked like it was carrying something very heavy without bending. The panel translated the signal. It was from a ship called in their language, something the panel rendered as relentless correction. The commander of the relentless correction was addressing the inhabitants of the third planet from this star. It knew the refugees had come down here. It had tracked the energy signature of the crash. It was giving the inhabitants of this world 12 hours to surrender the 47 fugitives to Dominion custody. Failure to comply would result in a demonstration of force against one of the planet's population centers, chosen at the Dominion commander's discretion. After the demonstration, the offer would be extended again, another 12 hours. Another chance to comply. It expected compliance. Pre-contact worlds in the Dominion's experience always complied. They had no choice. The math was too simple and the firepower was too large. Maria read the translation twice. Then she looked at Veth. "What's a demonstration of force?" Veth was quiet. "For a moment, 1 city," it said. Enough to make the number understood. The camp was very still around them. "How many people in 1 city?" Derek said from behind Maria's shoulder. It was not quite a question. Veth did not answer that. The number was too large to be useful. "Okay," Maria said. She looked at Bradley. "Get me Washington." She did not actually speak to Washington. Washington was busy speaking to itself. What she got over the next 4 hours was a feed of information from Bradley's communication channels as the world absorbed what was happening. The signal had gone out on every frequency. Every government on the planet had heard it. The translation had been done within the hour. The Vulcan had helped Veth, working with 3 linguists over a conference call that was equal parts urgent and surreal. The United Nations had convened an emergency session at 6:00 in the morning New York time. It was not a calm session. There were arguments. There were loud arguments. There were representatives who stood at the podium and said, in careful diplomatic language, that the lives of 47 aliens could not reasonably be weighed against the safety of billions of humans on a planet that had not asked To be involved in this, they said it. With sadness, they said it was. Mathematics, not cruelty. They said the only rational response was surrender. There were other representatives who said nothing but sat and listened and wrote things down. And there were others who said that the logic of surrender assumed the dominion would stop at one demand, that giving up. 47 people today was teaching a lesson about what happened when you pointed a large weapon at the third planet from this star, that the lesson being taught mattered as much as the outcome of today. The session went 3 hours without resolution. Bradley kept Maria informed. She sat in the camp and listened and watched Veth, who had gathered the other Velkin and was speaking to them in low sounds. Several of them looked at her as Veth spoke. She did not know what it was saying. She watched their faces instead. The younger ones, the ones she had decided were children, were close together near the warmth of the generator. One of them had its small, four-fingered hand wrapped around Carol Briggs's fingers. Carol had sat down next to it an hour ago to offer warmth, and had not moved since. The math was not simple. The math was not simple at all. At 9:00 in the morning, Veth came to Maria. It had the panel. It had clearly been thinking about what to say for a long time, because when it spoke, the words were careful in a way that earlier conversations had not been. We would like to surrender, Veth said. Maria looked at it. No, we do not wish. The panel worked. We do not wish to be the cause of harm to your people, to your cities, your children. It's dark. Eyes moved to Carol and the young Velkin, still holding her hand. We understand. The mathematics, it is the same mathematics that has followed us for 8 years. One community can be asked to accept loss for the safety of many. We have been told this many times. Pause. We understand this argument. I know you do, Maria said. The answer is still no, Sheriff Ray's, Veth's voice through the panel was steady, but something underneath it was not. You do not owe us. You're right, Maria said. We don't owe you anything. We met 3 days ago. You fell out of the sky into a cow pasture. We had no reason to help you. And we did. And now that there's a cost, you want to protect us from it. She looked at Veth directly. I understand that. I respect it. The answer is no. Veth stood very still. Why? It said. Maria thought about it honestly. She had been thinking about it all morning. Because the first time you give someone up to save yourself, she said, you tell everyone watching what you're worth. You tell the people who came after you what the right play is, and you tell yourself something about who you are that you can't untell. She glanced up at the gray Montana sky. We've had enough of that lesson on this planet. We know where it ends. The panel was quiet for a moment. After it translated, then Veth said something the panel did not translate. Immediately, it cycled through the sounds, tried several outputs, settled on one. In our language, Veth said slowly, there is a word for a thing that should not exist, a thing that is too costly to be real, too much to hope for. It paused. We use this word for stories. Old stories about someone who helped when helping was not the rational choice. Maria waited. I did not think the word described a real thing, Veth said. At 11:00 in the morning, the President of the United States went on live broadcast. She was a small woman who wore her authority like a coat she had owned for a long time and was not impressed by any more. She stood at a podium with a seal behind her and spoke for 7 minutes. She said that Earth had received the Dominion's demand, she said. It had been heard and understood, she said that the 47 Vulcan refugees who had crash-landed in Montana were under the protection of the United States and, as of 90 minutes ago, under the formal protection of 63 other nations who had signed an emergency joint declaration. Before the session ended, she said the refugees would not be surrendered. She said that there was welcome to reconsider its position. She said this with the tone of someone reading a grocery list. Maria watched the broadcast on Bradley's tablet. Behind her she could hear James translating for Veth and the others. She heard the moment the meaning came through, a long collective silence, and then that soft clicking sound from multiple throats at once, more of it than she had ever heard, layered and overlapping, like something that meant more than yes, like something that meant we did not know this was possible. The military had been building for 2 days. It had been quiet about it, the way military movements are quiet when they are serious. Aircraft had been repositioned, naval assets had changed course in 3 oceans. Underground facilities that were not officially acknowledged had been opened and staffed. Phone calls had been made between capitals in languages other than English, brief and coded and understood. Colonel Bradley walked Maria through what they had. It was not enough, he said this clearly, without trying to soften it. What Earth had in orbit was not designed for a fight against something that had crossed star systems. What they had in terms of firepower was built for a planet that fought itself, which meant it was pointed inward and downward, not outward. But Bradley had spent his career thinking about the word. But the Dominion ship was one vessel, one Hunter-class pursuit ship that had been chasing 47 unarmed refugees and expected to find a pre-contact world with no space capability and no will to resist. Its crew had not prepared for a fight. They had prepared for a collection that mattered. They think this is a formality, Bradley said. They've done this before. Pre-contact world, big weapon, simple demand, done in a day. He looked at the tracking data on his screen, the moving dot that was the relentless correction drifting in from the outer system. They've never met us. What do we have? Maria asked. Nuclear capability in orbit within 6 hours if the order goes through. Conventional military satellites with kinetic weapons. The Vulcan ship, Veth, says it's damaged, but 2 of its weapon systems are still functional. That's more than we were working with yesterday, and if they hit a city anyway. Bradley was quiet for a moment. Then we hit back, he said, and they learned that hitting us costs more than it gains them. He paused. That's the bet, Sheriff, that's the whole bet, that the cost. They didn't plan for changes there. Math. Maria thought about the representatives at the UN who had talked about mathematics. She thought about Veth saying the same word, mathematics, like it was a cage. Brief Veth on what we have, she said, full transparency. They've been fighting this longer than us. Maybe they know something we don't. The Dominion's 12-hour deadline expired at 3:47 in the afternoon. Nothing happened immediately. The relentless correction held its position in the outer system and broadcast again the same message, extended by 6 hours. Courtesy, perhaps an assumption that the first deadline had not been taken seriously enough. The camp on the Hartley pasture was quiet in the way that things are quiet before something loud. Veth stood next To Maria at the edge of the trench, the ship had made 3 days ago. The sun was getting low. The mountains were turning purple. It was very beautiful in the way that places are sometimes beautiful when you are aware you might not see them again. My people have a saying, Veth said. Through the panel, when something is already lost, you grieve it and you let go. You do not spend the lives of others on a hope. It paused. We said this to ourselves for 8 years. We said, do not spend more lives, accept what is. Survive. Maria waited. I think Veth said carefully that we were wrong. I think surviving and being alive are not the same thing. The sun touched the top of the mountains. Somewhere above the darkening sky, the relentless correction was moving closer. Maria looked up. She thought about 10,000 years of human history, all of it loud and bloody and wasteful and sometimes luminous. She thought about every time something large had looked at something small and expected it to fold. She thought about how often it had been right. She thought about the times it had not. Get some rest, Vet, she said. Tomorrow we show them what pre-contact looks like up close. She walked back into the light of the camp where James was checking a patient, and Carol was helping a small Velkin child figure out the mechanics of a zip-up blanket, and Derek was cleaning a rifle he knew would be nearly useless, and doing it anyway because doing something was better than doing nothing. The stars came out. The clock ran down. Earth waited. The second deadline expired at 9:47 in the evening. This time, the relentless correction did not extend it. It moved. Bradley's tracking station picked it up 12 minutes later. The ship dropping from the outer system toward the inner planets at a speed that made the room go quiet. It was not a fast approach. It was deliberate, measured, the speed of something that expected no resistance and therefore saw no reason to hurry. Bradley made 3 calls in 4 minutes. The third one came back with a single word: authorized. He walked out to the camp where Maria was standing with Vet and 2 of the Velkin engineers who had been working on the ship's remaining weapon systems for the past 18 hours. The systems were not built for ground-to-space targeting. They had been designed to fire from a ship in motion at another ship in motion, adapting them to fire from a crash-landed hull on the surface of a planet with different gravity than their home system at a target moving through the upper atmosphere. Had required a kind of improvised engineering that made James wince every time he walked past. It worked. Vet's engineers said it worked. Maria had decided to believe them. They're coming, Bradley said. Vet's eyes moved to the sky. How long? At this speed, 4 hours to optimal firing range. Less if they accelerate. Vet turned to the 2 engineers and spoke. They went back inside the ship. How long until your weapons are warm? Maria asked. They are warm now, Vet said. They have been warm for 6 hours. Maria looked at Bradley. Bradley almost smiled. Good, he said. At 2:00 in the morning, the relentless correction entered the inner solar system and broadcast again. The message was different this time, shorter. The translation came back in under a minute. Because the panel had been fully calibrated for 30 hours, it said, final warning, surrender the fugitives within 1 hour or the demonstration begins. The pre-contact world is advised not to attempt interference. Interference will be treated as aggression and the response will be proportionate. Maria read it. Then she looked at Veth. Proportionate, Veth said quietly. That is a Dominion word. It means you cannot imagine the scale of what we can do, so anything we do is proportionate to your failure to comply, right? Maria said, Bradley, tell them no. Bradley picked up the radio. The message that went back was short, composed by Maria and Bradley together. Translate into the Dominion's frequency by the panel. It said, the request is denied. The individuals you are seeking are under the protection of Earth. Remove your vessel from this solar system. Long silence, then through the panel a single response: initiating demonstration. The strike was not aimed at a large city. It was aimed at a medium-sized coastal city on the eastern seaboard with a population of about 800,000 people. The Dominion commander had chosen it the way you choose a page in a book to demonstrate what fire does to paper. It was not personal, it was illustrative. The strike package left the relentless correction at 2:34 in the morning. It hit the first layer of Earth's orbital defense network at 2:41. What the Dominion commander had not known, could not have known, given that this world was listed as pre-contact and therefore unmonitored in any serious way, was that the orbital defense layer had been fully activated and loaded for 40 hours. What had been designed to intercept ballistic missiles between human nations had been reprogrammed and repositioned and aimed at the sky instead of at each other. It was a patchwork. It was incomplete. It had large gaps and significant limitations, and the engineers who had built it had designed it for a completely different threat. It intercepted 61% of the incoming strike package. 61% was not a complete defense, but the remaining 39% hit ocean. The city shook, windows broke. Across the waterfront, a section of harbor was destroyed. No one in the city died. It took the Dominion commander 40 seconds to understand what had happened. No pre-contact world had ever intercepted anything. The doctrine did not have a response for this. The manual did not have a page for this. The Dominion commander did what all commanders do when the plan stops working. He improvised. The second strike was aimed at the crash site. Maria heard the targeting alert from Bradley's console at 2:49. She was already moving. She grabbed Veth by the arm, the first time she had touched any of them directly, and Veth did not flinch, and pulled it toward the reinforced shelter they had dug into the ridge 3 days ago. Now she said, not to Veth, but to the radio in her other hand. Veth, tell your people now. Veth was already calling out. The Velkin who were outside moved fast, faster than she expected, considering how many of them were still injured. They moved the way people move when they have been running from something for 8 years, and fear has become muscle memory. The 2 engineers inside the ship did not come out. They stayed at their stations. The strike came down in a column of white light that made the whole valley bright as noon for 3 seconds. It hit the ridge 40 m to the north of the ship. The ground jumped. The shelter shook. Maria hit the wall with her shoulder hard enough to leave a bruise she would not notice for 2 days. Then Veth's engineers fired back. The sound was not like any weapon sound Maria had heard. It was not an explosion. It was a deep pulse, like the lowest note on an instrument that did not exist, felt more in the chest than the ears. The ship's hull vibrated. Lights in the camp flickered. She got to the opening of the shelter in time to see the second pulse leave the hull. The Tracking screen showed it climbing fast. Faster than the first. The Dominion ship was visible now, not to the naked eye, but on the screen, a moving mark against the scatter of stars. Both pulses were closing on it. Bradley was at his console. His face was lit by the screen's light. Direct hit on the first, he said. Second is he stopped. Second hit there, he leaned forward. They're changing course. The Dominion commander's name was Kale. Sure, he had commanded 3 collection operations before this one. Each had been simple. Each had followed the same pattern. Each had confirmed what Dominion military doctrine had always said. Pre-contact worlds were not threats, they were resources. They were waiting rooms. He was looking at his damage reports and struggling to recognize the situation they described. His forward weapon array had taken a hit from something that should not exist on this planet. The hit had not been critical. The relentless correction was heavily armored, but the energy signature was Vulcan in design, and the accuracy was not the accuracy of a damaged crash-landed ship fired by desperate refugees. It was coordinated. It was targeted. It had been fired the moment his own strike landed, which meant someone on that planet had been watching and ready, and had used the cover of his own assault to return fire. He had also just been informed that his first strike package had been 61% intercepted by a pre-contact world. He sat with that information for a long moment. Then he pulled the relentless correction back to higher orbit. Outside, the Vulcan weapons demonstrated range, and he opened a channel to the planet's surface. The message came through at 3:15 in the morning. You have damaged a Dominion vessel. This constitutes an act of war under interstellar convention. The consequences of this action extend beyond the current situation. You are advised to consider your position carefully. Maria read it. Bradley read it beside her. He's stalling. Bradley said he scared. Maria said, same thing. She wrote the response herself. The panel translated it. You fired on a populated planet. You attempted to kill civilians. We responded. If you consider that an act of war, you are welcome to continue the engagement. We are still here. The people you came for are still here. We are waiting. Silence for 11 minutes. Then this is not finished. Maria wrote back, no, it isn't. Leave our solar system and it will be finished. For today, stay and find out what pre-contact means up close. Bradley was hit during the third exchange. The Dominion had shifted to a longer range weapon, something that could reach the surface from a higher orbit, something slower but harder to intercept. It came down at 3:40. It hit the edge of the camp. Bradley was outside at his console. When it hit, he had refused to move into the shelter because he needed line of sight to the communication array. The blast threw him 12 FT. James was on him. In under a minute, Maria was there too. Bradley was conscious, which was good. He was bleeding from the head, and his left arm was at an angle that it was not designed to be at, which was bad. He was also still trying to read his console screen while lying on his back, which was very Bradley. I'm fine, he said. You are not fine, James said. The ship is fine, Maria said. Veth's people got one more hit on the relentless correction. It's pulling back. Again, Bradley let James work on his arm. His face was tight with pain, but his voice was level. They're testing range. Every time we hit them, they pull back and find a new distance. There. Looking for somewhere we can't reach. Can we reach them anywhere they go? In this system, maybe, depends on what. Veth's engineers have left. He looked at her, and our nuclear platforms are in position. Maria looked at Veth, who had come to stand at the edge of the light. If we escalate to nuclear, she said. What does that tell them? Veth is. For a moment, that you are willing to destroy yourselves to resist them. Pause. No pre-contact world has done this, no world at all in my lifetime. Its dark eyes were steady. It will confuse them. Good, Maria said. I want them confused. The exchange went on for 2 more hours, 3 more strikes from the Dominion, 2 more from the Vulcan. Weapons 1, a kinetic response from the human orbital platforms that tracked the relentless correction to its new position and hit its engine array on the 3rd attempt, which Earth's tracking stations described as a minor impact and which Kaelsher's damage report described as a significant systems disruption. One of Veth's engineers died. At 4:20, her name through the panel translated to something close to steady hand, which was what her people called her because of how she worked. She died at her post inside the ship, killed by strike that punched through the already damaged hull. Veth received the news. Standing next to Maria, it made no sound. It stood straight and closed its eyes for 3 seconds and then opened them again. Maria did not say anything because there was nothing to say. At 5:00 in the morning, as the sky began to go from black to dark blue in the east, the relentless correction stopped firing. It held position at the outer edge of the system, damaged but not destroyed. Silent, Bradley, his arm splinted and his head bandaged and his voice still completely level, read the tracking data from his console on the ground. It's not leaving, he said, but it stopped. Maria looked at the sky. The stars were fading. In the growing light, it's reporting back. Veth said, Kaelsher is telling his commanders what he found. And what did he find? Derek asked. He had not slept. None of them had. He was sitting on the running board of his truck with an empty coffee cup and a rifle he had never fired and never would fire at a target in orbit, and he looked at Veth with very tired and very steady eyes. Veth looked around the camp, at the Vulcan sheltering near the ship, at James working on Bradley, at Carol sitting in the dirt beside the small Vulcan child, both of them asleep now. The child curled close to the warmth of a human it had known for 3 days. He found, Veth said slowly, that this world does not behave like the others. The sun broke over the mountains. It was cold and bright, and everything was still. Standing for now, the relentless correction was silent for 9 hours. 9 hours of the Dominion ship sitting at the edge of the solar system like a splinter that had not decided whether to go deeper or work itself out. 9 hours of Earth's tracking stations watching it, updating its position every 30 seconds, reporting still there, still there, still there. The camp on the Hartley pasture did not rest. Bradley's arm had been set. He had refused morphine because he wanted to stay alert, a decision James called professionally irresponsible and personally unsurprising. The Vulcan wounded had made it through the night. 3 of the most critical ones had stabilized in a way that James credited less to his own work and more to something resilient in their biology. They healed faster than humans, knitting tissue together in hours that would have taken human bodies days. Carol had slept for 3 hours on the seat of her truck, Derek had not slept at all and showed no outward sign of this except that he had gone very quiet, which for Derek meant he was conserving himself the way a coal fire burns low and steady when it has a long night ahead. Veth had not left the ship. Maria understood this. Steady Hand was still inside. The other engineers had covered her with a cloth from the ship stores, dark and close woven, and Veth had sat with her for 2 hours before returning to the weapon controls. There was no ritual Maria could offer for that, no comfort that crossed the distance of species and stars. She had brought Veth coffee without being asked, set it near the panel, and left without speaking. The coffee was alien to Veth entirely. It had looked at it for a long time and then carefully taken a small sip and made an expression that Maria could not read at all. Then it had taken another sip. She took that as something good. The new message arrived at 2:00 the afternoon. It was not from Kale. Sure. The voice signature on the broadcast was different, lower, with a formality in the cadence that the panel flagged immediately as high rank address. Someone above Kale Shore had taken over the channel, someone with the kind of authority that did not speak to pre-contact worlds as a rule and was making an exception. The message was long. The panel worked through it in pieces. It acknowledged that the initial operation had encountered unexpected resistance. It did not use the word failure. It framed the situation as a misunderstanding, which was the diplomatic word for we did not plan for this and we need a way out that costs us as the least. It offered terms. The Dominion would withdraw the relentless correction from Earth's solar system. Earth would agree to a formal neutrality arrangement, a documented position of non-involvement in Dominion matters. The 47 Velkin currently on the planet would be returned to Dominion custody peacefully, and the incident would be recorded as a navigation error followed by successful resolution. Successful resolution. Maria read the translation twice, then she picked up the panel and wrote the response herself, word by word, with Veth watching. The 47 individuals in our care are not part of a negotiation. They came to this planet under duress. They are staying. If you want to discuss the terms under which your vessel leaves this solar system, we are willing to talk. The Velkin are not on the table. She sent it. Bradley read it over her shoulder. He did not comment. He had stopped trying to moderate her messages 4 hours ago. The reply from Dominion High Command took 40 minutes. In those 40 minutes, 3 things happened that Maria did not know about until later. The first was that the 2 Velkin ships that had successfully reached the sanctuary system, carrying hundreds of refugees who had spent the past 4 days believing Veth's ship was destroyed, received a transmission. It had been picked up and relayed by a network of monitoring stations that certain species maintained throughout Dominion space, listening for exactly the kind of signals that were not supposed to exist. The transmission described what had happened at the 3rd planet of a small star system in a region the Dominion had classified as empty and irrelevant. It described a pre-contact world that had intercepted a Dominion strike package, that it returned fire, that it damaged a Hunter-class vessel that had refused every offer and every threat and was still standing on the sanctuary ship. The Velkin who heard the transmission did not speak for a long time. Then one of them said, "Terrans." The The second thing that happened was that 17 other species who maintained monitoring networks in Dominion space received the same transmission or pieces of it, or summaries passed through intermediaries. Most of these species had been under Dominion control for decades. Several had been under it for over a century. All of them had at some point run the same mathematics that Veth had run. Weigh the cost of resistance, find the number too large, accept the terms of survival. All of them heard what a pre-contact world had done. They did not speak about it openly. They were not yet ready for that, but they heard it. Third thing was that Cale Shore, sitting aboard the damaged Relentless Correction at the edge of a solar system he had entered expecting to spend less than a day in, filed his formal damage report and his incident report and his request for withdrawal authorization, and in the section that asked for the primary reason combat effectiveness had been compromised, he wrote 4 words. Target world fought back. The reply from Dominion High Command was short. It was the shortest message they had sent. The fugitives are the property of the Dominion. This matter is not concluded. Maria read it. That's not a no. Bradley said. He was sitting up now, his splinted arm resting on his knee, studying the words on the panel. It's not a yes either, Maria said. It's a retreat with a face still on it. Veth came to stand beside her. It had read the message, they will not come back today, it said. Not with this ship. Not with this crew. A pause, but they will record what happened here. They will plan. When they come back it will be with more. I know, Maria said. This is not finished, Veth said. It was not a question, it was the same phrase the Dominion had used, reflected back without accusation, just honesty. No, Maria agreed. But we've got time now, time to prepare, time to talk to the rest of the galaxy. She looked at Veth. There are others out there who have been under the Dominion's thumb for a long time, people who ran the same math you ran. We're going to need to find them. Veth was quiet for a moment. You are thinking very far ahead. That's the job, Maria said. At 3:22 in the afternoon, Earth's tracking stations reported that the Relentless Correction had changed course. It was moving out the room where Bradley had set up his monitoring station went very still. People stopped talking. The only sound was the quiet feedback of the tracking equipment, and outside, the wind moving through the dry grass of the Hartley pasture. The Dominion ship cleared the outer planets and did not slow. It kept going. At 4:47, it jumped to faster than light travel and vanished from every screen. Simultaneously, the tracking room made a sound, then not a cheer exactly. It was too tired for a cheer, too aware of what had been paid for the day's outcome. It was more like a long breath that a great many people had been holding for a very long time. Finally released, the world took the next process. What had happened? It was not a clean process. Nothing about it was simple. The news was everywhere, and the conversations it generated were loud and sometimes frightened and sometimes proud and sometimes all three at once. People argued about what the Dominion's withdrawal meant, about whether it was permanent, about what Earth had committed itself to by refusing to hand over the refugees, about what was coming next. There were people who were angry. There were people who thought Maria Reyes and Colonel Bradley had made a decision on behalf of the whole planet that the whole planet had not agreed to. There were people who made very reasonable arguments about the risks of galactic conflict that Earth was not prepared for. There were also people who drove to the edge of the Hartley Ranch and stood at the fence line and looked at the ship in the north pasture and said nothing at all, just looked the way people look at things. They do not have words for yet. The 47 Velcons were moved to a more permanent facility after the first week. Not a prison, not a detention center. Something that had been a research campus and was large and warm and had enough space for people who were used to open air. James went with them, so did Carol, who had decided with the calm certainty she applied to everything that she was needed there and that the feed store could run itself for a while. Derek went back to the hardware store. He did not talk about what had happened. When customers asked him, and they all asked him, he said it had been a situation that needed handling and they had handled it. Then he changed the subject. This was also very Derek. Veth came to find Maria on the last night. Before the move, they sat outside in the dark on the running board of Derek's truck, which had become, through some unspoken agreement, their place for the conversations that mattered. The camp was quiet. Most of the Velcons were inside. The ship's hull was cold. Now, the power systems had been shut down to conserve what was left of them. Veth carried the panel, but it did not turn it on immediately. They sat in the dark for a while. Above them the stars were thick and clear. Maria had started looking at them differently in the past week, not as something beautiful and far away, as something closer, as neighbors, some of whom she had not met yet, some of whom were in trouble, all of whom were now aware that this small blue planet existed and had opinions. I want to tell you something, Veth said, and activated the panel. Okay, Maria said. That word I told you about, the word for a thing too costly to be real. Veth looked at the panel, then at her. In our language, it is not one word. It is a phrase. It means, when you translate it very exactly, the kindness that should not exist but does anyway. A pause. We use it for old stories, myths, things that are told to children so they do not lose hope entirely. Maria listened. We have been telling this story for 4 days, Veth said. Our people on the other ships heard what you did. There are others. I have received messages through the network, others who lived under the Dominion for a long time, who stopped hoping. Its voice through the panel was steady, but underneath it something was not. They are telling this story now. What happened here, what you did. Maria looked at the stars. We didn't do anything special, she said. You sat down, Veth said. She looked at it in the dark with your hand open. When we were frightening, and you did not know us. Veth's large dark eyes reflected the starlight. That was the beginning of everything. Maria did not have an answer for that. She sat with it. After a while she said, what happens to your people, the ones on the sanctuary ships? They are safe for now. The sanctuary system is outside Dominion reach. A pause. But it is small. It cannot hold everyone forever. There are still many of our people on our home worlds living under the occupation. Veth looked at its hands. They cannot all run. Then maybe we don't make them run, Maria said. Veth looked at her. You said this isn't finished, she said. You're right, it isn't. The Dominion left because the math stopped working for them. We changed the math enough times. The math changes permanently. She leaned back against the truck. We've been doing that to each other on this planet for 10,000 years. Turns out we're pretty good at it. Long quiet, then Veth said through the panel carefully, in our language, when someone does a thing worthy of remembering, you do not simply thank them, you give them a word, a sound that carries the weight of what they did, so it is not forgotten, you don't have to. Your name, Veth said, is now also Velshire and Kath. The panel worked on. It cycled through approximations. Settled, the one who sat down, Maria, looked at the stars for a long moment. That's a good name, she said. 3 weeks after the crash, the Velcon ship was still in the north pasture of the Hartley Ranch because moving it turned out to be a larger engineering problem than anyone had planned for. And the government agency tasked with solving that problem was currently in its 4th week of meetings about jurisdiction. The trench the ship had made was still visible from the dirt road. A girl from town had put a hand-painted sign on the fence post at the road's edge. It was not official. Nobody had authorized it. It had gone up one morning and nobody had taken it down. It said in large red letters on a piece of plywood, they asked for help. We said yes. Below that in smaller letters someone had added with a different color paint, that's what we. Maria drove past it every morning. She never stopped. She did not need to. She just looked at it as she passed, the way you look at a thing that says something true, and kept going. There was a great deal of work left to do. She went and did it.